who's been chairman of the party, have managed to change gear and put it into the right perspective.
Is that a mild complaint that the early weeks were pretty negative, which is what the press and others have said about
Do you know, in a funny sort of way, I feel that the election started in October or November last year, and it was quite difficult to change gear immediately to get there. But in the event, we changed gear at exactly the right time, and I think we've taken the prize.
Well, I think that sounds fairly convincing confidence, Nick. We'll talk to you again this evening.
Thank you, Julian.
Now, back to Adam in the studio.
Thanks very much indeed, Julian. And I was wondering, David, with your panel guests, there's been a lot of talk. Is this like 1964 when 13 years of Tory rule came to an end, or is it a rerun of the 70s and those very close elections? I was wondering what our veterans think about that.
Yes, what do you liken it to at the moment? Is there anything to liken it? This level of sophisticated polling teaching us nothing? Is there anything to liken it to, any past election?
Well, I don't think the polls have ever taught us a very great deal, and as I say, if you don't have the details of how the polls were taken, we don't have them now, it's very difficult to evaluate results. But what I'd say is that we have a new electorate now, a lot of people who've never voted before, a complete change in the national, international environment, and a lot of people undecided are going to vote.
Right, well, at that moment, I think we've got Roy Hattersley, Labour's deputy leader, with us, who's no doubt as bewildered by all these findings as we are. Good evening, Roy. Good to see you.
Not a bit bewildered, David, but go on and ask me a question.
All right, I will ask you a question, O non-bewildered one. I will say unto you, how do you interpret these polls? How can you interpret them at all in your favour or not?
Well, both polls, whether it's the BBC poll that puts us ahead or the ITN poll that puts us behind on one figure but then says we're really breaking even, well, both of those polls are clear defeats for the government. The government started this evening with a majority of 100, and on both polls at the end of the evening, either with majorities of none at all or behind the Labour Party. Whatever else has happened tonight, even if the polls are right, is the government's been humiliated, and that's the first stage towards getting a new government and a better government and a Labour government.
And did you get the feeling in the last 2 or 3 days that the Tories were catching up with you?
Well, I didn't. I've never had such a warm response in the West Midlands as I've had the last 2 days. If there had been no opinion polls and no newspapers saying the Tories are catching up, I would have come here tonight believing it was a Labour landslide, because in the West Midlands it's been a triumph for the Labour Party throughout. And I think that mixed pattern is going to produce a Labour government tomorrow or tomorrow afternoon.
And you think it'll be a majority Labour government on the basis of those figures, right?
I don't know. Let's assume the worst figure from the Labour Party's point of view. That means that the Conservatives are defeated, have no authority to hang on, have no right to hang on. And whilst they might do what Ted Heath did 25 years ago, try to hang on, in the end, they'll have to go.
Well, there's one set of figures that say 41-37 to the Conservatives, isn't there?
Well, the 41-37 to the Conservatives, the ITN figure, then goes on to say, I've just been performing for them as I'm trying to perform for you.
Beautifully, beautifully.
They then go on to say that because Labour's done so well in the marginals, in terms of seats, it must be equal. That was John Snow's judgment, equal. And if we are equal, that's much worse than I anticipate, I must say, because we are doing well in marginals. But if we are equal, that's a clear defeat, very near to a humiliation for the government.
And are there any particular seats, we were trying to spot significant seats, are there any particularly significant seats as far as you're concerned that will be telltale evidence of what you hope to see?
My guess is that there'll be different patterns in different parts of the country. I think we're going to do very well in the West Midlands. I think we're going to do quite well in London. I think we're going to do quite well in the North West. And I think when you put together all those amalgams of different patterns of attitude and voting, you'll see that the Labour Party in the next day, perhaps in the next 2 days if Mr Major tried to hang on, but we're soon going to have a Labour government, because whatever else has happened, the Tories have been defeated.
Well, obviously it's clear there is a swing to Labour, Roy, and we don't know exactly what it is yet. Exactly. Is there anything at all you'd have done differently in the last 4 weeks, Roy?
I don't think so. If I hear the voice of Dennis Healey in your studio, I better say that what I would have done is had more Dennis Healey on television, on radio, in the streets, otherwise he'll complain. But apart from that, I don't think I'd do anything
All
else.
right, well, let him have a word with you direct. Would you like to thank Roy for that gracious compliment?
No, I always thank Roy ever since he said about me that he bites your legs. But I have actually spoken like you, Roy. I've spoken in 30 marginals, and the impression I have is exactly like yours. I think we're going to do very well. Still remains to be seen in the light of the number of people who haven't previously declared their intention. whether we shall have an absolute majority or form a government without an absolute majority.
David, can I say one very serious thing?
Yes.
I'm looking forward to this night enormously, and I think I'm going to be rejoicing tomorrow morning. My one very real regret is that Dennis Healey is leaving the House of Commons. I remain the absolute admirer of Dennis, and I wish he was going to be there tomorrow or the week after.
Well, this is a delightful love-in. Thank you very much indeed, Roy. We may see you again. I hope it's always a joy talking with you later in the night as this fascinating, nail-biting climax is reached. Thank you very much indeed, Roy.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
So if Roy doesn't know if Roy is not confused, he doesn't know what's going on.
Wiping a tear from either eye, you're with Sky News, the only station keeping you continuously abreast with events as they unfold over the next 24 hours. Of course, they're counting now. They are in Basildon, and they'll need to count probably very carefully. That's a Labour target, a 3% swing.
An Essex Boy Scout.
An Essex Boy Scout, my good friend Adam Belton is telling me at the moment. David Amos, pro-hanging, a Labour target. 3% would do it, and that's one of the seats in the south that Labour need to win.
Of course, they're also counting Billericay down there as well.
Yeah, well, they're counting in a lot of places, and we'll be going to them live.
In Basildon, they're counting Billericay as well. Theresa Gorman's seat.
Yes, she reduced her age slightly in the press releases.
Well, or she's had monkey gland treatment or something. I don't know quite what the details of all that are.
First result due sometime after 11 and vying to be first past the post. The likes of Guildford, Northampton, North, Torquay, Blackpool and Cheltenham. Bulk of the results will come between around midnight and 3 in the morning. So now let's take a look at how the last day of campaigning went and at the campaign as a whole.
The voting is over. The die has been cast. The counting has begun here in Birmingham and across the country. John Major at home in Huntington tonight, with TV projections confounding the opinion polls, suggesting there may be a hung parliament with the Conservatives, the biggest party. Election day brought fine weather and a high turnout almost everywhere, from remote polling stations in the English countryside to Belfast, where voting took place under the heavy shadow of army security. All votes are private, but some less private than others. Paddy Ashdown in Yeovil admitting he felt nervous, but seeing the weather as a good omen.
This is what we call in Somerset Pride of the Morning, and it always signifies a great and beautiful day, and I think that's what it's going to be.
In Huntingdon, John Major set off early to cast his vote.
I voted for the party that's going to run the country for the next 5 years.
Feeling lucky?
Feeling lucky, feeling winning too.
Neil Kinnock in Isloin said the election stakes were high, but he was confident.
Every family in the country has got a vested interest in using their democratic right today, and I certainly hope they'll do so.
What would you say?
As election day dawned, the machinery of democracy was rolling in unexpected ways. Dustmen helped to deliver ballot boxes in Richmond in Surrey. In part of Bristol, people used the returning officer's car boot to vote in after vandals superglued the locks to the polling station. 2 polling stations in Lincolnshire had to be covered with brown paper after the Tories complained they were painted in Labour Party colours. The coming hours will see decided the fate of almost 3,000 candidates, a record. But none need fear doing worse than a certain Mr. F.R. Lees, who stood as a temperance Chartist candidate in Ripon in Yorkshire in 1860. He polled no votes at all. Martin Benedict, Sky News.
Well, it's too late to do anything about it now, but over the last 3 days I talked to the leaders of the 3 main parties and I asked each of them what Britain would look like in a year's time if they became Prime Minister.
Britain would be a country which had found the will to invest in education substantially to give our children and our economy a chance for the future. Britain would be a country that faced up to the challenges of the environmental threat that now poses a problem to the whole of mankind rather than running away from them. And Britain would be a country at the centre of Europe, shaping our future, not standing on the sidelines and complaining. But above all, Britain would be a country with a modernised constitution and political system so that we had a government that knew its limits and citizens who understood their power.
Unemployment will be coming down. There'll be more people in high-quality training schemes. We'll be starting to get our transport projects underway. House building will have picked up very considerably because of the capital scheme that we've got. Old age pensioners will, in the case of couples, be £8 a week better off. Single pensioners, £5 a week better off. All families with children will be getting the family allowance at the full rate for all of their children. And the great thing is that we'll be moving into sustained recovery.
The propositions that the Conservative Party have set out have been constant for years. There are things that we believe are very important for the future of the economy. We think low taxes are important, not just so that people can have more of their own money to spend, important though that is, but because of the incentive effect of low taxes. And equally that's true of taxes on companies. If taxes on companies are lower, we are more likely to get inward investment. And we've had about 50% of all the inward investment that's come into Europe.
Coming up, so much what our three experts are thinking as the tale unwinds, and the prospects possibly too of a hung parliament.
Plus 16 years on since the Liberals steeled themselves for a pact with Labour.
I want the Liberal Party to be the fulcrum and centre of the next election argument, not something peripheral to it.
All that and more to come after this latest election mastermind.
And these are the headlines at 27 minutes past the hour. Well, the polls closed 27 minutes ago, and all the exit polls conducted by The Sun, by ITN and by the BBC all indicate so far tonight a hung parliament. The counts are due to begin very shortly at halls all over Britain. We'll know the outcome for certain in a few hours, so you better stay with Sky News. But firstly, and briefly, the other news making the headlines this evening. Manuel Noriega has been found guilty of drug and racketeering charges by a jury in Miami. The former Panamanian dictator faces a maximum sentence of 120 years in jail. He'll be sentenced on July the 10th. The International Court will give its verdict on Tuesday on the row over the Lockerbie suspects. The ruling will be announced just 24 hours before United Nations sanctions against Libya are due to take effect. And Russia and the Ukraine have called a truce in their confrontation over the Black Sea Fleet. They plan to negotiate a settlement. The decision was announced as President Yeltsin won a victory against conservative hardliners in Moscow. Plans to strip Yeltsin of his special powers were halted. Now to Mike.
So, to judge from our projection and the exit polls, we're facing a close run thing tonight and the possibility of days of comings and goings at Downing Street. This was how the parties were represented when Parliament was dissolved nearly 4 weeks ago. It underlines the task facing Labour tonight. Adam has this report.